Rain lashed down, blurring the world beyond the windshield. Wind howled like a hungry beast. The old highway, slick and black, stretched out before me, swallowed by the storm. I gripped the steering wheel, my headlights cutting through the downpour like dull knives. This drive was supposed to be relaxing, a chance to clear my head. Now I just wanted to be home, tucked away from the fury of the storm. Each flash of lightning illuminated the empty highway, and each crash of thunder seemed to shake the very car around me. My hands were slick on the steering wheel, and my eyes stung with fatigue. I thought about pulling over, waiting out the storm, but something kept me moving forward. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was the unsettling feeling of being utterly alone. Then, through the sheets of rain, a figure appeared. At first, it was just a flicker in my headlights, something white and indistinct against the dark backdrop of the storm. As I drew closer, the shape solidified. A woman, elderly and frail, standing by the side of the road. She wore a long, dark coat, its edges dripping with rain. Her shoulders slumped with what looked like exhaustion, and she clutched a worn leather handbag close to her chest. Her face, pale and drawn, was turned towards me, her eyes reflecting the stark glare of my headlights. For a moment, I hesitated. The storm raged around us, and something about the woman, the way she just appeared out of the darkness, sent a shiver down my spine. But then, common decency, and maybe a touch of morbid curiosity, took over. Pulling over to a stop beside her, I rolled down the window just a crack, enough to be heard over the storm. "Need a lift?" I shouted, my voice barely audible above the wind and rain.
Nods. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raspy, as if unused for days.
I nodded, unsure of what else to say. She didn't offer any information about where she was going, and I didn't ask. The silence in the car was thick and heavy, punctuated only by the relentless drumming of the rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. The woman stared straight ahead, her gaze fixed on some point in the distance. Her hands, gnarled and pale, rested on the worn leather of her handbag, her knuckles white as bone. We drove for what felt like hours, the storm showing no signs of abating. The highway was deserted, not another soul in sight. The woman remained silent, her presence both eerie and strangely comforting in the confines of the car. Then, with a voice barely a whisper, she spoke.
"Turn left here,"
she said, pointing to a narrow dirt road I hadn't even noticed, almost completely hidden by overgrown trees. The lane was barely wide enough for the car, the branches of the trees forming a dark and oppressive tunnel overhead. I thought about protesting, turning back, but something in the woman's voice, a note of urgency, kept me moving forward. We emerged from the trees into a small clearing. A dilapidated house stood before us, its paint peeling, windows dark and lifeless. A porch swing creaked mournfully in the wind, and the whole place seemed to sag under the weight of the storm and time.
"This is it,"
the woman said, her voice stronger now, a hint of relief in it. She reached for the door handle, then paused, turning to look at Josh for the first time since she'd gotten into the car.
"Thank you,"
she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips, and then she was gone, disappearing into the storm, her figure swallowed by the darkness of the porch. Josh sat there for a moment, engine idling, unsure of what he had just witnessed. Had she really been there at all, or was she just a figment of his tired, storm-rattled imagination? Curiosity, or maybe something else, a need for answers, drew him out of the car and towards the house. The rain had eased slightly, but the wind still howled around him. As he approached the porch, he noticed the swing was still moving, swaying gently back and forth as if pushed by an unseen hand. A voice raspy with age startled Josh.
"You've seen her, haven't you?"
Josh turned to find an old man standing in the doorway, his face etched with grief and something else, something akin to acceptance. He leaned heavily on a cane, his eyes, rheumy with age, fixed on Josh.
"Seen who?"
Josh asked, his voice a nervous croak. The old man gestured towards the empty porch swing.
"My wife. She died years ago, you see, on a night like this. She was coming home from her sister's, caught in a storm just like this one."
He paused, his gaze distant, lost in the memories of a storm from long ago.
"She always did like a good storm."
He murmured more to himself than to Josh. Josh stood there speechless, the old man's words echoing in his ears. The porch swing creaked, its mournful song the only sound in the stillness that followed. And then Josh understood. The woman in the storm, the empty porch swing, the old man's grief, it all made a terrible, heartbreaking sense. Josh had given a ride to a ghost, a lost soul seeking solace in the storm.